Our speaker tonight is Nick Scrimenti, who is currently living at Bonneau, and he was educated. He was born and educated in America, and he's posed this very intriguing title to his talk, which is "No Such Thing as Meditation," and then tradition, history, and change in Christian contemplative practice. I think Nick's has a great background to talk about these matters, as he did a bachelor's degree at Georgetown in divinity and then a Master of Divinity at Harvard Divinity School, and now is living at Bonneau. So the influences are rich and wonderful. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Paul. It's a great privilege for me to be here today, and I can tell we have a lot of wisdom in this room. So I'm going to put some ideas out there and we can explore together, and I'm hoping at the end there'll be some time for dialogue and for questions. And can you all hear me okay before I get started? Okay, great. So yes, as Paul mentioned, today I'm going to explore a somewhat provocative idea, which is that there's no such thing as meditation. And you might ask yourself, if there's no such thing as meditation, what did we just do for the last 25 minutes? Well, I hope for the time being you can let go of some of your skepticism, because I think that this idea can help us to think about our tradition of meditation in a much broader and more nuanced way. So by way of illustration, I'd like to start with a short anecdote, which I promise will be relevant to meditation later if you just stick with me. So I like to play basketball, and in America it's quite common to just show up to a public court, find a few people, and start playing a game of pickup. And while the style of play will vary depending on who you are playing with, because of trends on the professional level that trickle down to us amateurs, you're likely to find a similar style of play across the country. It's flashy, individual style of play that is fast, physical, and characterized by a lot of three-point shooting. So there are several cultural and historical reasons why basketball is played in this way in America that I won't go into today. But just to say that this is the kind of basketball I am used to, and the skills I work on while practicing are meant to make me a better player within this context. Since I've been living in France, however, I've encountered a very different style of basketball. The game is slow, not nearly as physical. There's a lot of passing and less dribbling. The team is more important than the individual. And lots of three-point shooting is not the norm. Even the basketball itself has a different texture to the ones we use in the States. My first time playing in this style, I was at a loss. I kept trying to play in the way that I know, shooting the ball, doing flashy dribble moves to get past my defender, and playing in the rough and fast style that I was used to. Needless to say, it didn't work out too well. I was lost on the court, frustrated that I couldn't score, trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Eventually, I figured it out and adjusted, but in the process, I learned something that surprised me. There is no such thing as basketball, or at least not as a single monolithic sport. Only a diverse collection of cultural practices and expectations centered around physical activity that we name basketball. Ostensibly, the game I play in America and the one I play in France are the same. They are both, at least nominally, basketball. But the stark difference in play raises an important question. What makes basketball basketball? This is a question we will ask again later with regard to meditation. What makes meditation meditation? But for now, let's extend this metaphor just a bit further. The author Nick Green takes up the question of what makes basketball basketball in his 2021 book, How to Watch Basketball Like a Genius. He notes that when basketball was invented by James Naismith in the late 19th century, the game could hardly be recognized as the same basketball that is played today. For one thing, Naismith had a no running rule, so that when you caught the ball, you had to stop in place and throw it to a teammate without moving. That's quite a different kind of sport from the fast-paced game we watch today, where players can run the length of the court, sidestep a defender, and dunk the ball all in the space of about 3 seconds. What's more, at various points throughout the history of the game, basketball has been played with and without a shot clock, with and without a three-point line, and with various court dimensions. Changes which radically change the look and feel of the sport. To make a long story short, the game of basketball has undergone a significant and continuing evolution from its inception to the present day. So we've learned two very important things about basketball so far, lessons that will extend to our understanding of meditation in just a moment. The first is that basketball is internally diverse. So, for example, American basketball is different from French basketball, is different from Nigerian basketball. The second is that it evolves and changes. So, for example, the elimination of the no running rule. The third and final important thing to know is why there is diversity and change. And the reason is that basketball, like meditation, is embedded within cultures with particular histories, politics, and expectations. According to Diane Moore, who's a professor at Harvard Divinity School and director of the Religion and Public Life Initiative, these three principles, internal diversity, evolution and change, and cultural embeddedness, form the foundation of what we might call religious literacy, which is not just the accumulation of trivia and factual knowledge about religious traditions, but the ability to discern and explore the religious dimensions of political, social, and cultural expressions across time and place. So if we can understand that religion, like basketball, is internally diverse, meaning even within religious sects there is diversity, that it evolves and changes, and that it is embedded in cultures, then we can begin to understand our own tradition and practice of meditation in a generative and religiously literate way. So if we begin to analyze our own tradition of meditation using these three principles, we might be surprised at what we find. For example, I'm sure most of us are aware that John Main developed his teaching from the desert tradition, and especially from the writings of the 4th century monk John Cassian. Yet you might not be as aware of the fact that John Main is a rather poor interpreter of Cassian. As Adalbert de Vogüé and myself have pointed out, there are important differences in the teaching of Cassian in the conferences and the teaching of John Main. For one thing, Main dispenses with Cassian's insistence on using the prayer formula, "O God, come to my assistance," in favor of using the Aramaic word Maranatha. Main also recommends 2 discrete times of meditation every day, whereas Cassian's teaching revolves around continuous prayer, integrated into daily life. Finally, and although this may seem like a minor semantic difference, a crucially important distinction between Cassian and Main is that Main introduces the Sanskrit word mantra into this tradition, while Cassian uses the terms prayer phrase or prayer formula. So what are we to make of these differences? Are the differences significant enough that we could describe these as 2 distinct practices, 2 distinct teachings? Well, it's a bit like looking at the original rules of basketball and comparing it to the present day game. Both could be called Christian meditation, but in actuality there are different rules, different styles, and in effect they are radically different. Like basketball, Christian meditation has evolved and devolved throughout the centuries, picking up different approaches from all kinds of outside influences. Within our own tradition, as taught by John Main, a major, if not almost entirely ignored, outside influence came from a rather unlikely place. 20th century colonial Malaya, which is now present-day Malaysia, where in 1955 John Main met a certain Hindu monk named Swami Satyananda. So if you'll indulge me, a quick at who Swami Satyananda was and how his own religious lineage came to influence John Main, I think this can help us to understand the historical and cultural contingency of the practice of meditation. So John Main was stationed in colonial Malaya in 1955, in the final days of British rule, at a time when Hinduism itself was changing quite radically. An intellectual class of English-educated swamis and their mostly affluent lay followers were in the process of renegotiating and changing their tradition in response to the challenges posed by modernity, colonialism, pluralism, and the West. These swamis, much like the reformers of Bengal of the previous century, were wrestling with how to assimilate the values of Western culture into their tradition, while also retaining a stance of resistance to colonial rule. One way in which they did this was by establishing societies of charity and social service, which was responding to the colonial assumption that Hinduism lacked the charitable ethos of Christianity. So by shifting the locus of Hindu religiosity from Bhakti Yoga, which is the path of devotion and meditation, to Karma Yoga, the path of action and selfless service, these swamis were responding to the colonial critique while also institutionalizing Hindu religious life and forming communities, such that a certain Hindu national identity could form in Malaya as it neared its independence. So this is an important point. As a consequence of this shift, these swamis found themselves spending less time practicing meditation and postural yoga, and more time giving lectures, building orphanages, or feeding the hungry. Swami Satyananda, who belonged to a religious lineage of reformers, chiefly of the tradition of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, he founded an orphanage and an ashram called the Pure Life Society in Malaya in 1952, which established a local organization in continuity with the Ramakrishna Math and Mission and other earlier reformist societies that first emerged in India. The Pure Life Society, which is similar to many other societies in Malaya at the time, emphasized ecumenism, universalism, and charity work. And although swamis like Swami Satyananda were busy building out these institutions, by no means were meditation and postural yoga wholly forgotten. Rather, the teachings on meditation changed, and they were tailored to accommodate both the very active lives of these swamis and the growing number of lay people that they counted as their followers. So rather than practice meditation for long and arduous periods, Swami Satyananda advised a much more moderate practice that he himself learned from his teacher, Shuddhananda Bharati. Meditate for a half hour at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Does that sound familiar? In this context, japa practice, or the repeated recitation of a sacred name or word, when performed for a mere hour per day, provided a simple and accessible way to balance karma yoga and bhakti yoga without infringing on the many charitable activities of the society. It was also billed as a practice particularly suitable to lay people. So John Main, after meeting Swami Satyananda and studying with him for over a year, would bring this practice back to the West and particularly into the post-Vatican II Benedictine religious life of which he was a part, where meditation practice was used similarly to empower lay people and reform his monastic order. Swami Satyananda's influence can be seen clearly not only in the particulars of Main's teaching, such as the 2 discrete times of prayer in the morning and evening, and the use of the term mantra, but also in John Main's universalism, his commitment to lay spirituality, and his approach to other religious traditions. If we take seriously the influence of Swami Satyananda and the lineage of Hindu reform on John Main's teaching which I do, then we have to challenge some very fundamental assumptions about our tradition and practice of meditation. The first and perhaps most fundamental assumption that must be challenged is that Maine, quote, rediscovered the tradition of Cassian and the Desert Fathers. Maine did not rediscover so much as reinvent the traditions of the Fathers, just as Satyananda himself was integral to a modern reinvention of a particular set of Hindu traditions. Maine could not take an ancient practice like contemplative prayer and transport it wholly unchanged into the modern world, in just the same way that to try to play basketball today by the original rules of the sport would be to ignore many decades of development and change. The second assumption concerns whether or not Christian meditation is, from a descriptive point of view, actually Christian. And to be clear, I'm not saying that because there is a clear and indisputable Hindu influence on this practice, that it is therefore not Christian. Rather, I'm making a categorical argument against the hard distinctions we place between Hinduism and Christianity. An honest historical accounting of our tradition raises the questions: what is Christianity? What is Hinduism? As someone who studies religion and is mostly uninterested in making normative claims about what distinguishes authentic Christianity from inauthentic Christianity, all I will say is that the history of religions and the history of our own tradition shows quite plainly that the barriers between religions are often much more porous than we would like to believe. Religions never evolve in a vacuum and are always engaged in a process of mutual development with other traditions. So all claims about tradition are also historical claims. Sometimes, however, the historical record contradicts and challenges our ideas of tradition by unveiling a historical landscape colored by enormous diversity, change, and a lack of any essential unity. In his book Tradition and Apocalypse, David Bentley Hart writes, "The theological concept of tradition is necessarily the concept of a rational and indivisible unity, somehow subsisting within a history that encompasses an incalculable number of large, conspicuous, and substantial transformations." He continues to say, in his typical polemical style, that any uniform narrative about a demonstrably constant orthodoxy preserved from the earliest centuries onward, and the intractable evidences of early Christianity's historiography, has assumed the institutional form of what in psychotherapeutic parlance might be characterized as a dissociative identity disorder. I might not be as harsh as he is, but his point still stands. He concludes that any supposed unity within the Christian tradition is actually an illusion, a lie. There's no such thing as tradition. So to sum up, our practice of meditation looks different from what the Desert Fathers taught, and we practice for different reasons and in different contexts. Our practice emerged also, as we've seen, from colonial Malaya, and so our assumptions about the distinctions between Christianity and Hinduism, about what makes Christian meditation Christian, about an unbroken continuity from the Desert Fathers to our own age, need to be reevaluated. But this is the really important thing. Meditation is being continually redefined by you and by me in our own context, so that meditation as an unchanging, unified, and discrete practice doesn't exist. Now, we can view this as a challenge to our values of tradition and religious heritage, or we can view it as a gift. We can become better historians, better scholars of religion, but also better meditators, if we can loosen our grip on our ideas about what meditation is. The history I've just presented to you can be an opportunity for us to let go of even our concepts of meditation itself. and this might allow for a much more capacious understanding of our practice to emerge, and generate an openness to a sense of tradition that is both broad, diverse, and wonderfully complex. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I remember we actually visited the Divine Light community that John Main learned to meditate in when the John Main seminar was in Malaysia. And I remember hearing that story afresh, that the thing that really attracted John Main to the Swami's teaching was he witnessed how selfless people were in their service. And he said, I've never seen people being so selfless. And he went to the Swami and said that. What lies behind this kind of joyful altruism? So I really love the way you've connected there, that puzzle that was John Main's, which is the expression of karma yoga, and how it connected with meditation. You've challenged us beautifully tonight, and I thank you so much for the talk. I think you've given us time too. If there's anyone else wants to ask a question, I think please feel free to do so. Yeah, put your hand up, so to speak. I can't see.
Roland
Okay.
Ashby has asked to say something. Roland?
Yes, thank you, Nick. That was wonderfully stimulating. Thank you. It struck me as you were talking that John Main made it clear that the true test of whether we're meditating authentically is whether we're growing in love. I wondered whether you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, that's the test that's presented in the Gospels, that you will be known by your fruits. And I think that's the test that John Main also gives us for our meditation. Yeah, and like I said in my talk, I'm not so interested in these kind of arguments about what is authentic and inauthentic practice. In a sense, all practice is authentic. And what I'm more interested in is how these practices come to be and how they come to be viewed as whether they're authentic or inauthentic. So John Main gives us many ways of understanding this practice within his own Christian background. But I think what I'm trying to say is that there's other ways of thinking about this practice as well. So, but thank you for your comment, Roland.
Teresita Koleko, would you like to ask a question? Teresita?
No.
Oh,
No,
you are unmuted, so I thought you wanted to ask a question.
Comments are welcome too, if nobody has questions.
Stefan.
Hi, Nick. I just say how impressed I am with your studies. I've always also been fascinated by this meeting of the John Main teaching and the desert tradition in Christianity, and then the influence in the Hindu tradition. And I think you've really kind of gone much further than I have in it. And thank you very much for sort of exploring that. Do I have a question? No, really, just to thank you for really opening that up and making clear that all these different strands are not sort of contradictions, but they work together, and that we're we have inherited a very broad tradition, and thank you.
Thank you, Stefan.
Nick, I want to thank you for your talk as well. I've got a question or something I'm pondering. So to use your analogy in regard to basketball, we've got a lot of change and development, but we are still using the name for the
That's right.
beginning and to where we are now. So to apply that, say, to meditation and to Christian meditation, do you think at some point the name might have to go? Do you think that there could be some changes within a tradition that stretch it so far that it ceases to have any continuity? And I guess the second question is, does it matter or not?
Well, I think that's for groups like this to kind of decide, right? We are the people practicing this practice and taking on this tradition. And so it's going to be decided not by scholars, but by the people on the ground actually doing the practice, I think. But I think what I'm trying to say is that there is continuity and there isn't continuity. And this is true of anything, really, is that if you look deeply at the historical record of anything that's trying to claim a historical continuity, you will find change, you will find diversity, you will find discrepancies. But we still have to work with language, and we still have to, we still have, like, people are still going to be calling basketball because it's just what we do, right? But and if you look at anything, like what makes this computer that I'm on a computer, what makes this mug in my hand a mug? I mean, we can get into the whole doctrine of emptiness and, and letting go of all their concepts. We still need words, we still need language. And I don't know, I mean, it's something that will continue to be defined, and religions are always coming up with new sects and new practices and schisms that break off and become something different. So we'll see. But just to say that when we talk about continuity, when we talk about tradition, that we're aware that actually these things are a lot more complicated than we think. And if we're claiming that we're practicing the same thing that the Desert Fathers were practicing way back when, well, we have to be careful about those kind of claims. So.
Thank you, Nick. I think you've stimulated a lot of, for all of us, I feel we're very stimulated from what you've said. So thank you so much. What a great gift. So we're now going to finish with prayer. And then after prayer, I've just got a few words to say to you. May the divine assistance be always with us.
And with our absent brothers and sisters. Amen.
Amen. As I said at the beginning today, this is the wonderful period of Advent, and it's a time where we think about gift giving, and I think we think about giving gifts to the people we love, or people who are often, people give gifts to school teachers or someone who served them during the year that's just gone by. It's a time to say thank you, as simple as that. And I think this is maybe a time to thank all the people who have been behind these Benedict's Well. There's I know a little bit behind the scenes with Benedict's Well, and what I know of that is there's a lot of people who work quietly and efficiently and selflessly to make this all happen. And if you feel touched by that, it may be a time to think about giving. I know Judy wants to say a word about this too.
Yeah, I think we've often spoken at the end of retreats that our hearts are very full, what we've received. We feel very grateful, very blessed. And I think a natural outpouring of that is a sense of generosity and a desire to extend to others what we have received. And so if we were at a retreat, we'd probably be standing with a basket at the door. So we thought we might extend the metaphorical basket to you all and encourage you to think about donating to the community simply by going to wccm.org and select the donate button, or you could go do it through your National Friends program, and the Australian bank details are up there. And if you just mark the reference Benedict's Well, we'll know that that is there for paying the license for the Zoom link for the next year, and also just in general to support the whole wonderful community that keeps everything ticking along.
Thank you, and I'll return you to Julia to finish our evening
Or
off.
Mary, yeah.
Or Mary, sorry.
No, it's me.
It's
That's
Julia.
Julia.
It's me. So thank you, Nick, once again for that really stimulating talk. I'm sure we're all going to be pondering on those ideas for some time to come. But now it's time to look forward to next week and something very different. We have Father Jim Caffrey talking to us. And the title of his talk is Building a Parish of Meditation and Service, an Update. So last March, Father Jim talked about the dream of a contemplative parish in Ballally, Dublin. And Father Jim will be recounting the story so far. He will be joined by Brendan Conroy, the newly appointed leader of the Parish Pastoral Centre. Brendan is an integral to the promotion of the vision. So that's something very different for us to look at next week and to see how far Father Jim and his parish have come. So once again, thank you all very much indeed for being with us. And we hope you have a very good week, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. So have a good week. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Nick.
you, Benedict's Well. You're wonderful,
Bye.
all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.